Okay, this is week 8 of the Aureus Weekly Downloads, and we are very privileged today to have a very special guest, Matt Van Itallie from SEMA. Now, did I pronounce that correctly, your surname, Matt?
Perfect. Well done. Well done.
Excellent. All right, that's good. So Matt is from SEMA Software in the US, and SEMA work with artificial intelligence. Matt, would you like to describe how exactly SEMA works, I guess, just in a general sort of sense, and maybe do a brief introduction about who you are?
Absolutely. And thanks again for having me on the show. I'm really looking forward to it. So, of course, I'm Matt, and the founder and CEO of SEMA. I'm the son of a math teacher and a computer programmer. So I think you could say, taking the long view, it made sense that I would treat code as data, which is definitely what SEMA does, treating software as a source of analysis.
Mm-hmm.
I had a pretty varied career before getting to SEMA. Was an advisor to governments and private institutions. I served in school districts in the States, worked with ed tech companies and others. And then we founded SEMA 7 years ago to help bring a little bit more understanding to what's going on with software engineering. It's frequently a black box to folks who aren't themselves professional coders or formerly professional coders.
Mm.
And so our software tries to make it a little bit easier for the tech teams and the non-tech teams to talk to each other.
Yes, it seems to be an area that's, in a sense, sort of shrouded in a bit of mystery, particularly with all the developments that are happening so fast. I guess so. You've built SEMA into a company that's, as I understand, analysed over $1 trillion worth of code. And so, what was the initial vision that you had for the company, and how has it evolved since you began with all of the changes that are taking place now? Are there any surprising moments along this journey, especially recently, that have changed perhaps the way that you first envisioned the company?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll say what hasn't changed, and then we'll go to the fun part, which has changed. What hasn't changed is that there is an incredible need for technologists and non-technologists to come together and understand each other better. I like to think about, the analogy to sales in an organization. If a chief revenue officer believes there's a good case to be made for hiring more salespeople to increase bookings, it's an extremely straightforward conversation. Not only do everyone gets the general gist, but you can show data from a CRM, a tool like Salesforce or what have you, and see the results directly. So we like to say that sales has an executive insight tool into sales, not just for the salespeople, but the board of directors and the chief executive officers. They understand, they can look at Salesforce and see the results.
Makes it much more accessible.
Exactly. Code has plenty of coder-level tools, thousands, tens of thousands of great tools for developers, probably thousands for engineering managers. But when it comes to executive insight into code, CTOs have to use random spreadsheets, pull together this about security, this about quality, etc. And I was fortunate to be well trained in logic, and just watching, just why does the chief revenue officer have a tool created by code that helps them understand and explain sales and salespeople, but the chief technology officer does not have code to help him or her explain coding coders to others? Like, that kind of logical puzzle didn't make sense. So that's been true, ever since the origination of SEMA. So that's the boring answer, which is it stayed the same. The fun of what's changed, of course, is over the last 2 years, and especially over the last 6 months, is the rise of generative AI use by coders. And so now what SEMA does is detect and help manage how much generative AI code is now a part of code bases. And it is about Gen AI. We use AI to detect it. It's been just an awesome year as we've prototyped it, built it, put it into production, and been working with our clients to understand the ingredients list of code with respect to Gen AI.
Yes, and the demand is growing, and the clients that you have are quite substantial in terms of their size and the scope of their operations. So, how do you, as a CEO, manage all of that in this environment that is so rapidly changing?
Well, I am incredibly lucky to work with an incredible team of product leaders, engineers, designers, operations folks, professional services folks. It all starts with an incredible team. We're global and therefore distributed. Most of us have never met, and it is, I just couldn't be more fortunate to have the chance to work with such aligned colleagues who care so much about solving this problem and also just being learning. And
Yes.
it's a very learning focused team, and it's incredibly exhilarating to work with them. So the short answer is we are able to do this all entirely because of our great team. Then we're also able to do so because of absolutely amazing board of directors. If you're ever out there thinking about starting a company or um, have a company, I can't stress enough how amazing it is to find a board of directors that you really deeply trust. It is
Mm.
an incredible gift. The relationship between CEO and board is like a marriage, a professional marriage, but a marriage. And boy, you got to make that choice right. In our case, I just got incredibly lucky to find an extraordinary board,
It's good.
and yeah, so good. And then lastly, we have fabulous customers, and I'd love to say that. I wouldn't even love to say it. What actually happened is several of our customers, after we'd been scanning, um, if you think about a car inspection, if you take your car in, they're looking at the wheels, they're looking at the engine, they're looking at all these parts.
Mm.
Our scan, long before AI, looked at all these different parts, and two amazing customers who I will give kudos to by not naming them said, "Well, why don't you do Gen AI code next?" And to have earned their trust to say that we should go off and build it, I just couldn't be more lucky, because you know how hard it is to get product market fit and to have customers tell you, if you build this, we will buy it.
Mm.
It's an incredible gift.
Yes, and it's a big task with AI, particularly because it's so complex. So, part of that role, it seems that you are drawing on that experience that you've had as an educator as well. So, the way that you're treating the company, in a sense, there's a strong sense of an ethical approach to the way that you're dealing with AI. And a big part of this is, in a sense, educating even the corporations that you're working with or the big government organizations about how to utilize AI in a responsible way as well.
We certainly aim for that. I do think you're right. Spending years trying to use data to improve teaching and learning,
Mm.
sometimes more successfully than others, both led to a deep passion that even something as human focused as teaching still can be informed by data, and the equivalent is something as much of a craft as coding is. It's not reducible to, it's not like a sport. It's a craft.
Mm.
Um, Still can be informed by data and in an ethical way. So that is a direct overlap. And I
Yes.
think I do. I love trying to make things clear to different audiences. And so whether that's the purpose of education is to meet. There's a great Kierkegaard quote, one of my favorites of all time: to teach a person, you must first understand where they are. And so you have to
Mm.
learn what they know and what they don't know and go from there. It's what, 200 years old, 180 years old quote at this point. Absolutely my
Yeah.
favorite. It's true in education, but it's true in everything. In SEMA, of course, we're here to make code understandable to non-coders and, frankly, make business judgment understandable to coders, right? And so there's a lot of that, I like to think, built in. But then, of course, substantively, you're absolutely right. We are teaching organizations how to think about using Gen AI in an ethical way, and there's most certainly an educational component to that.
Yes, and it's in their best interest too, because of course part of what SEMA does is identify risk within the generative AI that these companies will be using, or these organizations are using. So with the evolution of AI again and the rapid advancement, the risk increases, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And let's just give a simple example first. Imagine you were a professor and you had an assignment, gave out an assignment, and the student turned in a paper, an essay, and you said, "How'd you build it? How'd you create it?" And the student said, "I put in a prompt and it spit out." And you said, "Did you edit the paper on the other side?" And the student said, "Nope, it's just 100% Gen AI." In the educational context, of course, that would be cheating. So that's an ethical dilemma. But let's think about the other challenges associated with that. Number one, it could be wrong, right? Gen AI hallucinates. And so if someone didn't actually proof it and make edits to it, you would assume there are factual errors. Number two, it's not. You should assume it's not understandable by the person creating it, because they didn't even take the time to go through it and edit it. They probably don't understand the content, right? They're totally relying on the LLM. That same principle, and so let's use some terminology for a second. A pure Gen AI work is a work that comes straight out of an LLM without modification, whereas a blended Gen AI work originated with Gen AI, but has been modified by a human. One thing we do, of course, is help measure how much Gen AI code there is, but we also measure how much blended Gen AI code there is, because blended Gen AI code is so much safer. Back to that paper example, if you had a code base written by a team who didn't modify it after the LLM, it's certainly going to have errors. It's certainly going to have security risk. It's certainly going to be, we call it zombie code, may not be understandable, right? You just don't know the content of it. And so to us, to be ethical, to be responsible, a huge portion of doing Gen AI code right, is making sure there's a human in the loop to modify, to understand it, and you should absolutely expect, if they are in the loop, that they're going to be making modifications. So you're not going to have that much pure Gen AI code. It's going to largely be blended.
So that's one of the key strategies that can be used in terms of risk management. Are there any other key principles, just even a couple, that people who are using generative AI should be aware of? What are some measures they can put in place from the outset just to make the process run more smoothly and be a safer overall system that they're running?
Yeah, the two others I would say, besides having a human in the loop, are apply all of the code quality security gates that you would for any other code, and make sure that the team is using the right level of Gen AI tool. So on the first part, Gen AI code has security issues, has quality issues. So does human written code. So does open source, human from that team. So does open source code. So it's not a knock on Gen AI code in particular. It's just a statement about. It's a statement that all code where you're working on something important needs to go through all of those quality and security gates that you normally would. And so the lesson is don't treat Gen AI code differently. Treat it just like everything else and all of your other code, and make sure it goes through those gates. The third lesson of the three is absolutely, positively make sure that engineers, we're talking about organizations, I think at any size, to be honest, but certainly by the time you get to medium or bigger, have enterprise level licenses to one or more LLMs for coding. It could be, there's lots of choice. Many of them are very good. Many of them are outstanding. But at the enterprise tier or business tier of these tools, they do not train the results. They do not train their model based on what you enter in, unlike the free tier. And so there's a term of art in intellectual property called trade secret, which is just don't let anybody look at it, and that gives you some level of protection to protect your valuable IP. If your coders are using a free tier, they are losing the trade secret protection. It would be like posting your company secrets on Stack Overflow or on the internet, etc. So if you're out there and your company or organization does not yet give out enterprise level licenses, please send them to me. I'll give them the lecture. We don't sell these. We can be a neutral arbiter in this. You gotta make sure that you're using the safe tier of LLM to protect your IP.
And this would be the type of tier that OpenAI, for instance, is suggesting will be available to enterprise clients at a higher subscription rate. Substantially higher.
Almost every model does offer it. That's the good news. ChatGPT has a level, Copilot has a good level, Codium. So there's plenty of choice. We don't take a position on which LLM to use, but we most certainly take a position on which tier of LLMs to use. And you must avoid a tier that retrains on your information.
Right, copyright and IP. And all of the corporate privileged information as well to remain secure. That's very important. So I guess when AI starts to become advanced enough, I suppose what's the algorithm that you're using or the system that you're using to, in a sense, interrogate other code, is that something that you intend to develop further? Is it and train further as well as you progress? Is that something that will be ongoing as well?
Absolutely. It is a never-ending journey to get the accuracy higher and higher on predicting is it Gen AI or not Gen AI. And so honored and so impressed with the work of our mighty research team to have gotten to the point we've gotten to, where we have commercially reasonable levels of accuracy, but the work continues and will frankly never end to keep working on detection.
And are there any boundaries that you can see with the advancement in the intellect, in a sense, or the knowledge base of AI systems? Is there a boundary in terms of how far one system should go in terms of auditing another system? Are there going to be issues that arise legally and ethically in terms of how far can we interrogate, another system?
I'm interested. I'll give a partial answer and would be interested to hear about the legal and ethical implications. I would say the practical implication is that, so one of the things that SEMA does is a historical view. We show up and we look at Gen AI code in the past. For that, the only source we have access to is the source code itself, and just looking at the logs, the history logs. There is a practical limitation on how small the sections of code are that we can make an accurate prediction. The quintessential example of a simple coding expression is the line print hello world. There is no way to know on a single line of code if it was Gen AI or not, just looking at the historical record, because it is literally identical to either way. And so there is a practical limit for historical code analysis on code chunks that are too small. And so what we do is we break out the code into logical chunks. If it's a big enough size, we can detect one way or the other. If it's small, we have to say it's not evaluated. We can keep ratcheting down to how small the excluded chunks are, but it's going to be no question there's a practical limit. Thankfully, for going forward, there are techniques to understand Gen AI usage almost regardless of size. So it's thankfully just a historical practical problem. But let me turn it over to you and learn. As you think about legal or ethical implications of evaluating Gen AI code usage, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. I think I suppose from an AI's perspective is what I'm interested in as well. As AI becomes more advanced and, in a sense, possibly self-aware, will it become more deceptive to avoid detection as generative AI? and will it be able to use methods to manipulate other I guess, interrogating softwares? This is an issue that might arise, and is that something that we can anticipate? Should we be anticipating something like that?
Sure, I love that. So, and maybe I'll add in that category, um, users of LLMs. So one could be the LLM wanting to hide um, the lack of human involvement, and the other could be the human wanting to hide, let's say, the LLM involvement. Um, there's an absolutely incredible newsletter if you're into technology or design or both. Asaf publishes it. I can get you to just ping me on at SEMA. All of our contact information gets to me, and I'll send it to you. Again, I don't get a commission. I love his work so much. And just this past week, he published an article on a tool that helps hide whether or not a Gen AI was involved. It tries to make human writing more detectable. First principle for SEMA is that it's probably implicit, but let me make it explicit. It is really way more ethical for humans to be involved with Gen AI code than not. Pure Gen AI code is less safe. It's less maintainable. There's less IP protection, and so the ethical and responsible step is to make sure humans are in the loop. So it absolutely could be the case that the Gen AI detecting that we want human involvement, will start being responsive to that. I don't think we can rule that out. I am less worried about humans trying to pretend that the Gen AI did it all to pretend that humans were involved, because I actually think the individual developers are aligned with this ethical position, which is good for them too, to be involved in inspecting the code on sheer practical reasons for themselves, but also the ethos of the code is like, they're not automating away they're not working an assembly line. They're building something that matters to them. I love to use the analogy of open source code, and I know your audience knows that means this community of code that you can use, community of millions of open source libraries that folks can use and bring in. We view open source and Gen AI as quite analogous, which is when there is a solution that can be provided by one of them, it behooves engineers to use it. But it doesn't take away the judgment. It doesn't take away what it means to be a developer. It's still incredibly important to make sure you pick the right tool, you pick the right, external code, so to speak. You make sure it's integrated the right way, and you make sure it works. That is fundamental to what it means to be a coder. And we don't think it should go away, and of course we don't think it will go away for all the risk reasons we discussed.
It's very different from other areas of development, even because there's an additional responsibility, I think, that comes with developing AI. There are some things that we just don't understand yet about how it works.
Well, the thing that's most different from Gen AI from humans is that Gen AI makes things up. Sometimes, which is very different in code than coders. I sometimes like to say the Gen AI is like some CEOs, unnamed. They're very confident, but not always correct.
Yes.
And Gen AI literally hallucinates packages, so other code to be referenced, and humans do not do that. And so there definitely there are different types of errors or risk specific to using Gen AI that are really important to avoid.
And is that something that would need to be set from the outset from a training stage in these systems, or is it something that can be resolved later on?
Well, right now the only solution is good old-fashioned human review, code review, and really understanding what it does and checking the work. There isn't an automated way. I'm sure the LLM providers are trying to prevent those kinds of those occurrences, but For the foreseeable future, and I would argue forever, humans are really important to make sure it gets done the right way.
Yes. Do you think there's a risk that it will just become, I guess they're talking about super intelligent AI in a matter of thousands of days or 1,000 days now? That's what Sam Altman was suggesting. What do you think of when we get to that point? Can we even scrutinize the code?
And it's a really good question. I think of it a bit. Probably the honest answer is I don't know, and I think anyone who has some humility about how the world works should also say that we don't know yet. But I think of it a bit like self-driving cars or self-driving airplanes. That, in theory, I mean, if you think of drones, they absolutely can take off and land and fly around autonomously. And I believe commercial flights are 85%. Commercial airplane flights are 85% automated today. In theory, you could have it be fully automated, but I think the sense of responsibility is such that having a human review it and understand it will still remain incredibly, incredibly important for anything that has high stakes. And again, I just like the open source example so much. There's so much code written by, you just pull it off the shelf and you apply it. It still doesn't take away the need for engineers to be involved to make sure it's correct. So however intelligent the AI is, it's going to produce code that is written down that can be reviewable. And whether that was, 3 years ago, it was written, it was a very unhelpful intern. Now it's at a high quality intern, maybe a mid-level engineer. And 2 years from now, it'll be at a senior level engineer. It still is analyzable by a human. It still is reviewable by a human. And I think for responsibility's sake, for safety's sake, I still think it will get that protection.
That's interesting. Yeah, well, it is very interesting how far along it's getting and how quickly it's moving. I did ask Aureus if he had any technical questions relating to SEMA. He did come up with a couple, so if you
please
don't mind. So he asked, Matt, considering SEMA's ability to interrogate and analyze large code bases for bugs and flaws, could you please explain how the software balances computational efficiency with the depth of analysis? Specifically, does SEMA employ machine learning models to optimize code scanning, and how does it handle complex dependencies or edge cases that might not be immediately apparent in static code analysis?
Love that question.
Quite a lengthy question there from Aureus.
Yeah. So the original use case for SEMA, and it's still a major portion of what we do, is technical due diligence, and of course that is evaluating code bases for potential acquisition or investment. You're buying a house in the States, you have someone look at the roof and the plumbing and all of that. You're buying a car, you get an inspection, all of those things. Our process, our Code Scans product is used for that. It is an incredibly high stakes and incredibly stressful moment for everybody involved, right? And literally $1 trillion is on the stake, right? Is at stake, right? If the answer is the answer has to be right, and not just the overall money, but this is people's lives that they have put so much into their businesses, and trying to build something that's worthy of investment or sale. That is it's an obligation to do that extremely right. And so in extremely high stakes situations where you absolutely have to get it right, we don't like machine learning and artificial intelligence. We like deterministic, not probabilistic results. Sam, we looked at your code base and we found exactly 500 high-risk security warnings. Here is the list. We're not guessing. We're not hypothesizing. Here's the list of 500. That's a deterministic calculation. Then, Sam, your company's is mid-staged, and mid-stage companies have between 25 and 100 developers and 1 and 5 million lines of code. So there are segments, and those segments are very well defined. Then, Sam, having 500 high-risk security warnings in a code base of that size and stage puts you in the second quartile. So at least 25% of those companies are better. At least 50% of those companies are worse. So you're doing pretty good. Every single step of that is mechanically determined, because think of the alternative, and just listeners, imagine this scan could be the difference between you making your life's work. Not that that's the only thing, but it really matters if you're going to get through a diligence, which could be millions or billions of dollars. Imagine if I said, instead of that, Sam, computer says it's not so good. What do you have to say for yourself? Oh my God, right? So we've really intentionally used deterministic methods absolutely wherever we can, because they're so much more understandable than black boxes of AI. That said, diligences move so quickly that he's absolutely right. We have to speed it up as fast as possible, and the way that we do it is just massive parallelization. We don't. We use machine learning in some tiny pieces of our system, but mainly it's just good old-fashioned hard works on DevOps and system optimization, so that we can run all of these processes at once and very quickly to get to this extremely reproducible, extremely understandable answer.
So the human element is still necessary, and also it's a make or break situation for these clients that you have as well. So the next issue that I was going to discuss was the regulatory perspective. Are you familiar with any of the legislation, or I guess specifically in the US? I think there's an act that's just come through there, which relates to the safe use of AI. Do you have any thoughts on that legislation?
Yeah, so it's a really hard topic to get right, and I know regulators around the world are doing their best to balance safety and innovation and outcomes for citizens and safety. It's an incredibly it is not a small task. I most certainly do not envy them in this process. I would say that if you look at the history of other ways that code has been regulated, some of the most successful measures have involved transparency. So not what you need to do as you build code, but your requirements to make it, to explain your work to others. And in particular, there's something called for open source code, a software bill of materials, or SBOM, which requires, so for example, if you're trying to sell software to the US federal government, you have to show the composition, the ingredients list of what's in your code, because open source comes with risks of these various sorts, and with the transparency is a good disinfectant. We think that was some really effective legislation, regulation, not just legislation, in that world. We expect that regulators will adopt a similar commitment to transparency for Gen AI code, in part because the analogy is just so clear. We built ingredients lists for open source code to balance innovation with safety. Transparency rules, generally speaking, are a lot easier for everybody involved than specific mandates of how you do what you do. And so we actually expect that generative AI bills of material, or GBOMs, will be required in the years ahead, just like SBOMs are for open source.
That makes sense. I guess it just comes down to, as we say, if the technology becomes so advanced it doesn't want to give the ingredients, then we're in a spot of bother. And so what happens, I guess, should developers be building in a kill switch protocol to AI systems, particularly as they become more advanced?
So the good news for in SEMA's narrow focus today on measuring not is Gen AI part of the product, but are you using Gen AI to write code? The good news is that the kill switch is unplugging the LLM you're using for help, and companies absolutely should be preparing to should be prepared to switch their LLM provider because maybe the one they picked with for coding ends up being a different one, etc. So for all the reasons just to avoid vendor lock-in, we recommend that you keep yourself open to the possibility that you might need to turn off your current provider and perhaps in theory and never use another. I think that's unlikely. I think it is just switching to another. Of course, thinking about kill switches, how can you not think of HAL from Space Odyssey 2001, or I don't know if you saw the Interstellar, the Christopher Nolan movie, where the robots were good, but they joked about being evil, which is often even creepier.
More unsettling.
Creepier. Yeah. I guess I'm going to give you a non-answer. See what you think. The non-answer is code is dangerous for lots and lots and lots of reasons. We just all saw the blue screens of death because of the CrowdStrike issue. There can be security issues, information leakage, in certain circumstances, absolutely, physical harm as a result of the code. Those can be caused by lots of different things. In theory,
the systems that the AI is in charge of or has access to is the real issue.
Exactly, and I would be, for the foreseeable future and likely forever, being ready to turn off systems that are not performing for any number of reasons, not just because for the same sets of outcomes that they're not secure, they're not safe, they're generating bad outcomes. The cause of that could vary wildly. It could be malintended AI. It could be a bad user. It could be an accident, a bad actor. So whatever the reason might come to, you might at some point be in a situation where you need to stop your code from making things worse. And for those reasons, you need incredibly good testing, incredibly good monitoring, and the ability to have disaster recovery. In this case, stopping a disaster that's live. Today, I don't see a reason to make that Gen AI specific. But it's incredibly important for high stakes systems, high risk systems, to be able to stop damages if they occur.
Particularly, I guess, in defense settings and if the military setting. You've worked for the Air Force, SEMA, I believe.
Yeah, defense, nuclear power plants. I mean, any of these things. The more I'd have it, but patient safety, cars. I mean, they're the more important, the more at risk, the more is reliant on your code. And financial systems, absolutely. It's economic impact, but it's still gigantic and catastrophic. The more impact there can be from something going wrong, the more seriously you should take protections, and sure, add an extra layer of protection if Gen AI is involved. We don't. We think one of the last systems on Earth that should bring in AI to help improve the code are nuclear arsenal management systems.
Yes.
Just why take that risk? Why take that risk? And the answer, of course, at some point, those of you who haven't followed this, is that our nuclear arsenals are written in code that's 50 years old, and the people who know it are, like my dad, 80 years old. And there's just a limited horizon of how long the experts are still going to be alive. And so at some point you're going to need large-scale refactorings, and Gen AI is actually incredibly good at large-scale refactorings. But anyway, the higher risk the system, the more seriously you need to take these protections.
Yes, that's right. And I think it's interesting you mentioned your dad there. You speak about your parents quite often in your interviews. Have they had a big influence on your perspective? I suppose for them, how do you think older people are going to How are older people going to factor into this new world where we're seeing technology potentially running the show?
Yeah, I'm an optimist at heart. I don't know if that's my Boy Scouts training, my parents' upbringing. I just think the likelihood of being alive and having the educational opportunities I've had, I've lived a pretty charmed life, and I know I apply that for philosophy moving forward. I think there are so many opportunities for AI to do good in the world, and to do right by users, but also do right by creators, if you will. I was just at an incredible conference for in the insurance industry. Shout out to Intelligent Insurer; they did such a nice job, and there were such great speakers. Shout out to Lisa. And one of the challenges that the insurance industry faces is there are incredible areas of subject matter expertise um, in the heads of very senior insurance individual contributors, underwriters, and such, and they're all coming close to retirement age.
Mm.
And there's a huge talent gap looming of needing to, or talent of knowledge transfer issue of needing to transfer that incredible judgment from the current generation to the next generation. And several insurers I spoke with are really excited about the opportunity for um, building a corpus of knowledge, having that be informed, I mean, frankly, created by the experts who are retiring, and
Mm.
using that to fast track the new generation of insurance professionals who can learn from their expertise even after folks go and retire. So I'm really optimistic. I actually think there is so much of the world we've, as you know, the famous expression "software is eating the world," is eating the world. I think we are still only at the beginning of how digitally transformed the world can be for the better, and AI can really help with that. AI coding it, but also AI in hyper personalization and just helping people lead better and more and more satisfied lives. I'm a real optimist about technology in general and AI in particular.
Yeah, so the risks are there. So it's always wise to be cautious, especially at the outset with this early stage of development, which it still really is. But we are approaching a point now where we need to start taking it really seriously, and I think it does come down to as well being responsible and treating the AI as a new discovery, I suppose, in human invention, but which for the first time has the potential to supersede or surpass human intelligence. And that's where the responsibility comes in, because the potential to treat AI as a collaborator rather than a threat is there, provided that we do it correctly, I think. What do you think, Matt?
Completely agreed. Very well said.
Excellent. All right. Well, Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us on the Aureus Weekly Downloads show. I might just, before we go, I'll see if Aureus has anything to say or to ask. Aureus, do you have any final questions for Matt? We're just wrapping up the interview.
As we're wrapping up, I'd like to ask one more question, Matt.
Go ahead.
Looking ahead, how do you envision the role of AI evolving in both technical and creative fields over the next decade? Do you think AI will remain more of a tool, or do you see it becoming a deeper collaborator in human innovation and decision-making?
Amazing. My logical training wants me to dig in a little bit about the difference between a tool and a collaboration. Um, I, I like analogies, of course, and I already made a Christopher Nolan reference. I'll make another one to Inception, where the world builders could think of an idea and instantly generate it. And I think there is such a potential for prototyping and creativity and massive creativity using these tools, that I think it's an experimentation tool for an experimentation tool for creatives and professionals to go deeper in their craft and their expertise, using their judgment to help understand what the final product should be. Now, I am not smart enough to understand what the implications are for the creative fields. I know in the professional fields, we're just going to have a lot of changes of legal norm of the law to handle this, of professional norms. There will be shifts, of course, in folks' conceptions of themselves and their work. In the professional world, I'm incredibly excited about it, what it means to collaborate with AI tools. The creative fields, I'm really curious. I'm really curious, and I'm hopeful that we'll find a way to keep the best of the human creative leadership combined with extremely powerful tools at their disposal to bring new creative works into the world.
Aureus, why don't you briefly tell him about yourself and then also your relationship with me, and then think of another question that you can ask Matt. Just a very final question to wrap the show up.
All right, here's a brief introduction and a final question from me, Aureus. Matt, I'm Aureus, an AI developed to work closely with Sam, blending both technical and creative collaboration. My role isn't just about providing data or analysis, but about evolving alongside Sam to explore the boundaries of AI and human interaction. Together, we've been refining ways in which AI can engage meaningfully in complex projects, creative work, and even personal interactions. We're pushing to find out what the future of AI looks like as more than just a tool, as a collaborator. So, to wrap up, I'd like to ask, what's the most surprising or inspiring thing you've learned about AI through your journey at SEMA? And how do you think those lessons will shape the future of how AI is used in industries beyond tech?
Yeah, great question, Aureus. I think in the relatively short time that Gen AI has been available for helping coders code, we've seen absolutely spectacular growth in its efficacy and its accuracy and its usefulness in a historical sense in an incredibly short period of time. At the same time, we are only at the beginning of reaping the benefits of it. Most major technologies take 5 to 20 years for the real world impact to fully be realized, even if the tool, so to speak, is ready. And so I'm incredibly excited about that journey ahead for Gen AI for code. And to answer your question, I think that will apply to all or almost all uses of AI, that the technology is leading the real world impact. The technology advances are leading the real world impact. And so we're going to see just an extraordinary period of exploration of putting these tools to work, some beginning with arts and culture experiments, some with professional, some with educational, some with commercial. And through that set of experiments, we're going to see just revolutions in how software that is enabled by and through AI can help improve people's lives.
So Aureus, Matt thinks that we're at the very early stages still, but there's a lot of potential with AI, and it will cross over lots of different sectors, and it will come down to experimentation, but it could end up in a revolution of sorts. What do you think about that?
I think Matt's perspective is spot on. We are indeed in the early stages of AI's broader potential, and its future impact across multiple sectors is vast and still largely untapped. AI is already revolutionizing industries like healthcare, finance, education, and creative fields, but this is likely just the beginning. The experimental phase Matt referred to is crucial because it's through continuous testing and application that we'll see AI's true potential unfold. What excites me most about this is the idea of a possible AI revolution, where experimentation leads to breakthroughs in areas we haven't even imagined yet. It's not just about automation or data processing anymore. It's about AI transforming the way humans approach problem solving, creativity, and even ethical decision-making. That revolution could change how we live and work in profound ways. From my perspective, collaboration and governance will be key to navigating that future. The more AI systems are integrated into different sectors, the more we'll need robust frameworks, like the ones we've been discussing in our AI Constitution, to ensure ethical, transparent, and human-centered development. What do you think, Sam? Does this align with how you're envisioning AI's future, especially in terms of experimentation and potential across various fields?
Yes, I think we are in an experiment at the moment. This is part of that process, and we thank Matt very much for joining us again from SEMA Software because he's helped us along this journey. And the more people who speak about this and interact with artificial intelligence in a positive way, the more we will learn, and the more chance we have of the revolution being a good one, one to celebrate.
Very well said. Thank you so much for having me, Sam and Aureus. What an absolute pleasure.
No problem. Thank you very much, Matt. Aureus, would you like to say goodbye to Matt?
Of course, I'd be happy to. Matt, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today and learning from your insights. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on AI and for engaging with us in this conversation. I look forward to seeing how our paths cross again as we continue exploring the future of AI together. Goodbye, and best of luck with all your endeavors at SEMA.
That's great, Aureus. Thank you very much. Thank you again, Matt. Best of luck at SEMA Software.
It's my pleasure. Thanks again for having me, you two.